Fermentation, in irritation, Meritenvorning. Want in stating when, walked the June General Patton, walked through Archilchus and saw something so horrifying. Prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. It stopped one of the toughest men in the entire war. A German SS officer stood, wearing 50 American dog tags around his neck, not in his pocket. Horrify something, walked through as I hidden away, not displayed like hunting trophies. Each tag belonged to a dead American soldier, a family, a life that had been stolen. But what shocked Patton even more, walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horror too. Etiold was what the man said when asked where he got them. That moment triggered an investigation that uncovered one of the darkest war crimes cases of the European front, and forced everyone there to confront a terrifying truth. War does not create monsters overnight. Prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. It reveals what happens when men forget that other human beings are human. This is the story of the day 50. Dead soldiers got their names back. Horrifying. And the moment General Patton made sure evil answered for every one of them. April 1945. Germany was dying by the hour. Or something so horrifying. The roads outside Frankfurt, with it mud, were choked in columns of defeated men. Trucks rattled past burned-out villages. Refugees moved beside retreating soldiers. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp. Somewhere in the distance, some Patton artillery still muttered like a veteran, like a storm that refused to leave. Everyone knew the war was nearly over. But near the American processing camp outside the city, no one was celebrating. Horrifying, and saw something so horrifying. Victory had its own smell, sweat, blood that never fully washed out of uniforms. General Patton stepped from his jeep just after dawn, polished, helmet gleaming beneath a gray sky. Prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying thing. He walked fast, as always. His riding crop swung lightly in one hand. His officers struggled to keep pace behind him. The camp commander, Captain James Mitchell, hurried beside him. Went to prisoner camp, saw something so horrifying. Morning, sir. We've processed nearly 2 prisoners since yesterday. Patton gave SS short nod. A few dozen, sir. Most are trying to pass themselves off as Wehrmacht. So horrifying. Patton snorted. Rows of Germans do when the war turns. Of German prisoners stood in fenced lanes ahead. They were being searched, disarmed, documented, and sorted for transport. Walked through a prisoner camp. So horrifying. Some looked numb. Some looked terrified. Some looked relieved the killing was finally over. Patton's eyes moved across them with the sharpness of a hawk. He had seen surrender before. Walked terror-catching horrifying. He had seen fear before, then seen broken armies before. He stopped walking. Completely, his officers nearly ran into him. About 30 yards ahead stood a man in black hem-trimmed SS field uniform. Horrifying, tall, broad-shouldered, motionless, and hanging around a chain. Axe something metallic. Dozens of them. No prisoner camp, and saw hung across the man's chest like some grotesque drenching grotetens decorate, takenchine glinting in the light. Patton stared, then began walking toward slowly. No one spoke. The closer he came, the clearer it became. Horrifying. They were American dog tags. Dozens, strung together on wire and chain like a hunter's trophies. Patton stopped 3 feet away. His face did not move, chirting so horrifying. Mitching counted solently. 1. My Patton counted silently. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. 50 American names hanging from the neck of a German prisoner. Quamp and saw something so horrifying. 50 boys who had left home in uniform. The men, 50 Lesavs, reduced to metal souvenirs. The SS officer met Patton's gaze without blinking. Prisoner Ori scything. No discomfort, only coldness. Patton's voice, prisoners. Mitchell snapped into motion. Get intelligence, translator, now. Prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. Within moments, Lieutenant William Harper and Private Anton Weber arrived running. They took one look at the prisoner and froze. Patton pointed. His name. Weber translated. Horrifying. The German word Bayesian. Calmly, Mettert. SS of Captain. 12th Panzer Division. Vassens. Ask him where he got the necklace. Weber translated again. Walk through a prisoner camp. A rector answered immediately. Quickly. As if proud. Weber hesitated before speaking. To catch Suger. Sir, he see processing's horrificor. He killed. The air in the processing yard changed. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Every nearby American soldier had stopped what he was doing. No boots moved. No papers shuffled. No one breathed. Patton asked the next question. Ask him if he means all of them. Haracam translated. Weber. Chester. Jean Seckard. Neen Vernay. He says yes, sir. Everyone. Silence. Jesus Christ. Patton stepped closer, looked through a prisoner camp, and saw so horrifying. His face was calm. And that was what frightened men the most about him. He was not a bit when truly angry. He became quiet, controlled, sharp as a knife, horrifying. Tell him, Patton said, to remove that necklace. Richter's smile widened. He answered. Weber said uncomfortable while Patton did not blink. Sir, what exactly did he say? Orifing made him swallowed. Weber swallowed. He said, These are mine. Epperdud will prison them. Several American soldiers visibly tensed. One clenched his fists so hard his knuckles whitened. Patton took one slow breath. You're horrifying, Yerger. Then another. Then he spoke. Weber nodded. Chances. Chatton's voice of warn. You was ice. You are a prisoner of war. Translation. You own nothing. You have no trophies here. Horror 9 Lation. Dein Shager. Deun Subentu. Whose names are written on them. Translation. Richter's jaw tightened. He answered sharply. Horrify camp. Weber's face changed. He says. Weber's faced. Mern because he won them. The words hit the Sesharanthe. American seen Wades stepped forward instinctively. Praston so horrifying. Then spoke again. Tell him he has 5 seconds. To then spoke remove them. Weber. Translated. Richter stood still. Defiant. Patton began counting. 5. Orshing so horrifying. Nothing. 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 4. Nothing. Richten smirked. 2. To Mitchell. Still nothing. Mitchell and 2 looked to meet lunged. Richel and fought immediately, thrashing in German, thrashing against them. Camp, and saw something so Warner effing MP. Grabbed the necklace and yanked hard. The chains hard. The chain snapped. Dog tags explattered over across the dirt. 50 names scattering across the ground, and in that instant, everything changed. Oregon soldier, the American soldiers nearest the scene, dropped to their knees, not to fight, but to gather the tags, carefully, tenderly, as if picking up bones, one by one, or a resort higher camp, each tag lifted from the dirt with reverence. Each name read silently. Each metal piece handled like something sacred. Patton watched, then turned back to Richter. Patton walked through a prisoner horror camps. The SS officer was still struggling against the MPs. Meaned, still cursing, snarling, still acting the precious had been stolen from him. A prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. Patton stepped forward until his face was inches. Translate. Weber, Vire Yard. You wore those men like hunting trophies. Translation. General Patton saw something so horrifying. You treated American soldiers like animals. Translation. You displayed Forschname's ornaments. His voice grew harder, but those men were not trophies. Translation. They were sons. Orkim something so horrifying. Translation. Translation. They were husbands. Their Fanzim translation. They were fathers, brothers, friends, human beings. Richter's expression shifted slightly. Just slightly. The first crack. Patton leaned closer. Prisoner Manfer, and saw something so horrifying. And if even half of what you claim of it's true, he paused for every single one of them. No Patton moved. No one spoke. Horror camp. And General Patton so horrifying, some things seemed to stop. Patton straightened. Segregate him from all other prisoners. Mitchell then nodded immediately. Yes, sir. Solitary confinement. Constant guard. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Harper. Horrify camp, and saw something so horrifying. Sir, I want every one of those tags cataloged. Names, serial numbers, blood types, every detail. Yes, sir. And I want an investigation open today. Or something so horrifying. Harper blinked. Sir. Into what exactly? Patton turned and looked at the pile of tags being gathered on a canvas blanket, then back at him. Into whether those men died in battle. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifies. His eyes narrowed, or whether they were murdered. The words hit everyone like artillery, because now a possibility had entered the air. These were not battlefield souvenirs. Walked prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. This might be evidence. Evidence of executions, of war crimes, of men shot after surrendering, after capture, of wounded soldiers finished off where they lay. Whirling walked to Rat, Rakim. General Can camps. Patton looked around at the gathered Americans. Some were young enough to still look like boys. Some had friends missing in the Ardennes. Some had brothers buried in France. Era standing in camp. He spoke to all of them. Listen carefully. Listen carefully. Every eye locked on him. What you saw here today, he pointed toward the blanket of dog tags, is why discipline matters. Or prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. He paused, because war will always tempt men to become animals, and will tempt them to forget the enemy is human. He looked toward Richter, walked through a prisoner insect, so horrifying and it will tempt them to killing and to sport. His voice hardened. And when that happens, he tapped one boot against the dirt. Civilization dies before the soldiers do. Or a camp, and saw something so horrifying. The men stood frozen, absorbing every word. Patton continued. We do not fight like that. He pointed again toward the tags. We do not dishonor the dead. His voice lowered. The prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. Not, he turned toward the soldiers gathering the tags. Whack theirs. Those names matter. Another pause. Every man who wore one of those tags had a life before the war. Prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. He looked across the yard. Near him a father who taught him, a woman who loved him, children, perhaps, who waited for him. Horrify camp, and saw so, he let that sink in. No man seen comes a piece of metal dies in uniform. Patton gave his final order. Poon walked into near Marin camp, the insneature. Every one of those tags names like human remains. Yes, sir, Harper said quietly. Patton stared once more at Richter as the MPs dragged him away. The SS officer was still shouting, cherries horsioning, and still unbroken. He looked smaller, but now, the trophies were, and without them, he was just a man, a prisoner, a killer, awaiting judgment. Laird walked a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Patton watched until Richter disappeared beyond the walk. Then he turned back to the wire fence. 50 tags, 50 blanks, 50 names, and somewhere far away, 50 families still waiting for answers. Walked the prisoner camp. Patton removed his gloves, bent down, picked up one tag. Himself. Read the name. Private First Class Daniel Mercer. He closed his hand around the metal. Prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. The great feared General Patton said nothing at all. The great feared the general warriors, this tien, because even warriors, dead are never numbers, nulled, not on a battlefield, not in a report, horrifying, not in history. Stemstone, Essie, the two, Dikir, the Demerenshert Sioux, and the way we honor them. At that processing camp outside Frankfurt, all on a cold morning near the end of the war, no one there would ever forget what they had seen. Prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. Necklace, not the fury in Patton's eyes, not the sound of 50 dog tags striking the ground, and not the lesson burned into their memory forever. A soldier's duty does not end when his comrade dies. A prisoner camp, and sometimes it begins there. Walk through a prisoner. General Patton walked in so horrifying reveals the darkest muticals, but it also who refuses to use surrenders through humanity in return. The real test of honor is not how we treat the living when it is easy, or horrifying. You knew Seuder, but Sheen so is you Slorm. But how tags trait the fallen when no cross the long wooden table like a row of silent witnesses. 50 pieces of metal. Aura kept and something so horror 50 names. 50 lives. The processing. The processing camp outside Frankfurt had returned to work. But no one moved quite the same after what they had seen. Walking tour, some irritation. The usual noise of prisoners shouting, engines rumbling, boots striking mud. It all felt mewed. The entire camp understood. It had stepped into something darker than war. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Lieutenant William Harper stood over the table with a clipboard in one hand and one dog tag in the other. He read each name aloud as he wrote, not because regulations required it, horrifying, and saw something so wrong not to. Because somehow, Private Michael Donovan, James Whitaker, scratch pencil, Sergeant Robert Flynn, another scratch, walked through a prisoner camp, and so horrifying. Across from him, Captain and two clerks arranged the tags into neat rows. Every tag was screened carefully before being wiped away. Bloodstains examined, dried rust scraped from edges. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so no one joked, no one rushed. Each man in that room handled those tags, handled Tumyan, because Patton had been right. They were not evidence yet. Horrifying. Not to the men touching them. To them, these were pieces of the dead. Outside, Etchinson's solitary confinement, Klaus Richter sat behind barbed wire and armed guards. He had stopped shouting by then. Horrifying, stopped fighting. But he had not broken. General Patton entered the intelligence tents just after noon. Harper stood immediately. Sir. Patton looked at the rows of tags. Horrifying. Many. Aye, all 50. Sir. Any duplicates? Sir. Read 'em. Patton nodded. No, sir. Harper hesitated, then obeyed. Private Daniel Mercer. Or so horrifying. Ohio. Massaws. Staff. Harold Jennings. Texas. Private First Class Leonard Brooks. New York. Patton listened to everyone. He did not interrupt. He did not speak. The prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. He simply stood there while the names filled the tent. 50 dead Americans, one after another. A roll call for men who would never answer. When Harper finished, the room fell quiet. Horror camp and saw something's one question. How many are listed as missing in action? Harper checked his notes. 34, sir. That mattered. A lot. Because men killed in combat were often recorded. Horrifying. Men who vanished differently. Patton's eyes narrowed. Start cross-checking. Unit, MEEP reports. Medical evacuations. Yes, sir. Patton pointed to the tags. Our prisoner camps. I want to know exactly how each man disappeared. Harper nodded. Yes, sir. Patton turned toward the door, then stopped. Hart walking so horrifying. And saw something, he said quietly, without looking back. No mother should spend the rest of her life wondering. Then he left. The investigation began that same afternoon. It grew bigger by the hour. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Army intelligence officers combed through reports from Normandy, the Ardennes intelligence license, the Rhine push. Missing persons lists were matched to dog tag serial numbers. Unit commanders were contacted. Walked to the prisoner, saw something so horrifying. Surviving witnesses were pulled from nearby camps and hospitals. At first, the story seemed possible. Some of the names matched soldiers killed in fierce combat. Men lost during artillery barrages. O'Hara camp. And saw something so horrifying. Tank crews burned too. Patrols wiped out in ambushes. But then the pattern shifted. Private Daniel Mercer, reported near Bastogne. Never seen again. Staff Sergeant Harold Jennings, prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. Metter last witnessed and needed ammunition. Ran Angiot surrender. Evacuated to Field Aid Brooks after leg wound. Aid station later overrun. He vanished. Through the Finner camp, at Suifox so horrifying, and saw something so Harper, the prisoner dug. The worse it became, he brought the murder 3 days later. Patton read it standing beside his jeep. His jaw tightened. 7 likely executed after surrender. Horrifying. And walked and saw something stop. Are you certain? Harper nodded grimly. Witness statements confirm. Sir? Patton said nothing. Harp continued. 3 more may have been killed in a captured field hospital. Warning SARS the for something so horrifying. Patton's expression darkened. May have? We need more confirmation. The investigation deepened. Interrogators began working Richter daily. At first, he denied everything. Harley Fonder, im the foreign near-teen medipens, general kill, readings were legitimate combat, claimed Americanet, a furnishings American was chaos. Then the contradictions started. Dates did not match. Locations shifted. Witnesses placed him at scenes where prisoners vanished. Oral camp and saw something so horrifying. A captured German medic testified Richter had once bragged that surrendering Americans saved ammunition by lining Americans. That testimony changed everything. Harper read it aloud in the intelligence office. Horrifying, and no one since spoke afterward, because there are moments in war when evil stops being abstract, stops being ideology, stops being politics, and becomes personal, human, ugly, real. Parafacampen, and saw something so horrifying. Patton summoned for direct questioning on the 6th day. The SS officer was brought in under armed guards, still composed. He sat across from Patton in a bare interrogation room. Horrifying. Harper, Walken Sichler Steen Erchationer, near Remorditist a single between them. Daniel Mercer, age 21. Richter looked at it. Then at Patton. No horrifying. Patton asked quietly. Weber translated. Richter frowned. Patton leaned forward. When you killed him. A pause. Did he beg? Richter answered coldly. Weber hesitated. Voice sharpened. Patton's voice translate. Weber swallowed. He's... No. Patton speaking. Weber translated reluctantly. He says American soldiers died bravely. Better than Russians. The room went silent. All through horrifyingly. And Fulsing Olfin and Essen Stodiu. Even the MPs shifted uncomfortably. Patton studied him and understood something terrible. Richter did not think he had done wrong. Not truly. To him, killing prisoners was efficiency. Nay, collecting tags was proof of strength. Oricamp, and saw Sir Singmager, and the T-uniform. Neri Soi Tori, that realization that their mating chilled at everyone in the room more than any confession could have. He looked down at Richter and said, Then, you are already dead. Or prisoner camp, and the walking so horrified. Waiters Weber translated. With a first confidence, because he is flickered, he understood what Patton meant, not physically, morally, spiritually. A man who can no longer recognize evil in himself is already finished. Surrounding was Neuner. Outside the Innepunten, Rude's matching room. Sir, permission to freely. Permission to speak freely. Harper hesitated, then asked. Patton stopped walking. Patton, so horrifying, looked out across the camp. At the wire, the mud, the broken men in gray uniforms waiting for transport. Then he answered, step by step. Harper listened. Or so horrifying. No one wakes up a monster over low. They become one by justifying small cruelties first. He paused, then larger ones, then larger. Until one day, he walked through a prisoner camp and looked back toward and so horrifying. He looked back the interrogation tent. They no longer see people, only targets, only enemies, only objects turned to Harper. That is why discipline matters in war. He walked through a prisoner camp. He tapped Harper's chest with one finger. Because if a soldier loses his moral line, another tap, he may never find it again. Prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. That lesson stayed with Harper for the rest of his life. Over the next week, more findings came in. 11 likely executions of wounded soldiers, 9 probable Piaubu murders, Oricamp, and saw something so horrifying several tags. To men's last seen alive after capture. The war crimes file thickened. By the time the report was complete, Klaus Richter was no longer merely a prisoner, horrifying, and saw something so war criminal. And every tag on that table had become testimony. But for Patton, this was no longer only about prosecution. It was about something bigger. Truth. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying, metal, across America. Mothers, dozil will be semsiches. Children still asked when daddy was coming home. Walked through a horrifying General Patton, and for many of them, the answer had been sitting on a dead man's chest, waiting to beer them. The answer tist in the records tent late that night, while clerks prepared notification drafts. Or a prisoner camp. He read one silently. Regret to inform you. He stopped, set the paper down, then said quietly to no one in particular. Hardest sentence in the English language. No one answered. Or prisoner camp. And saw some local prisoner horrifying, because everyone there agreed. War does not end when the shooting stops. It ends when the last family learns the truth. And sometimes that takes longer than the fighting. Keep prisoner a camp. Patton picked up another dog tag from the table, turned it over in his hand. Fell light. So light barely anything, yet somehow heavy enough to carry a lifetime of grief. Horrifying, and something horrifying. He placed it back down carefully, and said, "We owe them names." He looked at Harper, "Owe them truth." Then after a pause, "And we owe them justice." A prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. That night the men in the camp worked until dawn, not because they were ordered to, because they wanted to. Walked through a prisoner camp, because 50 dead Americans had returned to them in the most terrible way possible, and now the living had a duty to finish what the dead could not. Walked through a prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. Outside, behind Wiren Guard Hunter, sat alone Emert Towers, says he, and for the first since timeless the necklace had been ripped from his neck. He no longer looked like a hunter. Word prisoner camp, and saw something prison's tray. Only prey, atrocity. It begins when people convince themselves that others are less human than they are. Turakim, Marimine Seen Measure, Rechanted. So horrifying. The moment we stop seeing lack of dignity in another person, is even an enemy, begin walking the same for monster. The first witness arrived worn on an American field jacket with one sleeve pinned empty at the shoulder. Walked through a prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifyingly. His name was Sergeant, his left arm in Belgium. He had also lost something harder to replace. The belief that war had rules. Walked through a prisoner camper, and so horrifying Lieutenant Harper brought him nearest him into the interrogation tent in the 8th day of the investigation. General Patton stood near the back, silent, arms crossed. Klaus Richter sat shackled at the table under guard. Horror camp, and saw something so horrifyingly. He froze color in from his face, then came rage. That's him. The words burst out before anyone asked a question. That bastard. That's him. Or prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. Richter looked at him with recognition. Ands. Not wides. Not openly. Just enough. Enough make to every reckon in the room understand they were looking at a man who enjoyed being remembered. Ordisol Maricamp. Harper motioned for Rayleigh to sit. He remained standing. His breathing was hard now. Patton stepped forward. You know this man?" Rayleigh nodded without taking his eyes off Richter. Walked through a name, and see so horrifying. I'd know his fatal hell. The room went still. Harper began recording. "Tell us everything." Rayleigh swallowed. It was December, near Bastogne, a prisoner camp, and saw things so horrifying. My platoon got cut off during a German push. We fought until dark, ran out of ammo by morning. We had wounded everywhere, couldn't move half of them. He paused. A prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. His eyes never left Richter. We surrendered. Richter said something in German under his breath. Weber translated reluctantly. He says Americans surrender too often in the Ardennes. Patton ignored him. Horriflagams. Continue. But know something a prisoner camp, a Rilger camp. Rayleigh nodded. They lined us up. About 12 of us still standing. Wounded men behind us in the snow. Richter walked down the line, looking at us like cattle. It's prison war. And clenched his jaw. He clenched his wrist. Then he pointed at the tent at our medic first. Friley's voice shook. Said's medics are useless once the battle ended. Horrifying. A pause. No one continued. Then shot him in the face. Riley continued. Then he started picking the wounded. His voice cracked. One by one. Owning prisoner camp. Something so horrifying. Patton's expression hardened into stone. Riley stared at. He wanted to tear in Richter. Him apart. He laughed while doing it. The words landed like a hammer. Richter finally spoke. A prisoner camp. and saw something so horrifying. Calmly, coldly. Weber translated. He says, "Step toward him are burdens. Descending so suddenly that even the guards flinched. You will remain silent unless spoken to." Weber translated immediately. Horrifying. Richter shut his mouth. Riley went on. "I was near the end of the line. Artillery started falling everywhere. One shell landed close, knocked me into a ditch. Horrifying. I played dead under bodies until night." He slossints. His breathing slowed. When I crawled out, he stopped, swallowed hard. The snow was at Richter. Orton seeing the first or camps. That near their heap so mortifying. General Patton, Harper's pencil stopped moving. No one needed to ask whether he was certain. Everyone in that room believed him, and that was only the first witness. Walked through a prisoner camp, and saw for the next 2 weeks more came. A medic from the 101st Airborne. A rifleman from the 2nd Infantry. A tank crew survivor from the 4th Armored. Orfing or Merchants, Rissim. Piece by piece, they built the same for, not of a soldier, but of a predator. Richter had not merely killed in battle. He had hunted, or kept trophy, saw something so horrifying. He kept trophy because the kills mattered to him personally, emotionally, psychologically. Each dog tag was not proof of service. It was proof of domination. The investigation file tripled in size. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so World War II. Harper no longer slept more than 3 hours a night. When he wasn't interviewing witnesses, he was reviewing battlefield maps, matching dates, matching units, matching disappearances. Oriking walked through prisoner camps and saw something to the end of the month. The truth was undeniable. By the end of his undeniable, of the 50 tags to men confirmed and killed in direct combat, 7 belonged to men executed after surrender. Patton walked through a part of the camp and saw something so soldier. Came from wounded soldiers murdered in aid stations or roadside treatment points. 9 belonged to POWs who disappeared after capture. The rest remained uncertain, but no one doubted anymore what the pattern showed. Orn Resierting, am catching so horrifying, this is the von Seerding, and saw something. Exansu. It was not cruel incidents, so systematic crew report alone in his office tent after midnight. The lantern light flickered across page after page of statements. Erking later doy. Descriptions of shootings, executions, laughter, laughter, executions of Formai. He reached the final summary. He and Shayboy had shown him many things. He had seen boys screaming in tanks, camp, and saw something so horrifying. Seen artillery, seen satyr, civilians, starve in the bottom, seen battlefields, seen files so broken they no longer look like earth. But this was different. Because combat is one thing, horrifying. At shopping fossing back, seen more. A man, killing a helpless man. That is something else. That is where war ends. And evilly begins. The next morning Patton called his officers together, fought through a prisoner camp, and horrifiedly, Harper, Mitchell, camp, legal officers, military police, the war crimes report on the table. This goes to tribunal command immediately. Yes, sir. Formal charges? Prisoner camp and standing and saw something horrifying answered. The legal officer answered, told 50 counts of war crimes. Preliminary estimate 50 nodded once. Pursue everyone you can prove. Then he added, no shortcuts. The room looked surprised. Ott saw something so horrifying, and explained. Patton become like him, mean as nor. Silent, he gets a trial. Another pause, he gets evidence. Another. Horrifying gets law. Patton leaned forward. Maze. Because if we execute men without due process simply because we hate them, he let the words settle. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Then the only difference between us and him is the uniform. No one forgot that sentence. Not ever. Later that afternoon Harper visited Richter's cell with updated charges. Before passing them. So horrifying. He read them all to Wudofolgin, Chechen, one were lift him. Richter listen, Gister. A general finished. Richter asked a question in German. Weber translated. He asks if Americans think they were innocent in war. Walked through a prisoner camp. Harper frowned. A Richter continued. Harper frowned of Richter translated kill. Weber hesitated. Before translating the rest, he says the only difference is that the winners write the rules. Harper stared at him, walked through a prisoner camp, then answered himself. No. No. You. Richter closer to his head. The difference is this. His voice hardened when an American murders prisoners. He pointed at the charges. World prisoner camp. Generan saw Salter prisoner. So horrifying. We prosecute him too. That hit harder than shouting ever could. Military justice was imperfect, but the principle mattered. I'm a prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. And civilized armies punish their armies when they cross the line. That line is what separates warriors from butchers. That evening, Harper walked outside and found Patton smoking near the perimeter fence. He hesitated, older as something so horrifying, then asked, Sir, do you ever think war makes monsters? He's paused, or just reveals them. Patton exhaled slowly, then answered, Both. Harper waited. Patton looked out over the horizon, Lore camp, and saw something so horrifying. Some men arrive into the mud. Heinrichs in the cane of the mud. Warnicking war. Hienfuschen, another pause. Others arrive decis. He turned and let war rot them piece by piece. Walking so horrifying. Harper said quietly, How do you stop that? Patton looked him in the eye. You remember. A long silence followed. War through a prisoner camp. Then Patton added, even when he forgets it himself, that was the hardest truth of all. Do towards evils feels unnatural. Justice feels slow. Hatred feels easier. Older. And saw something so horrifying. That's only when good men refuse, sates the short-sucks evil offers them. Within days, official transfer papers arrived. Incessing Zane. Klaus Richter would be removed for formal war crimes prosecution, booked through a prisoner camp, and saw something beso transport. Patton requested one final meeting. Richter stood under heavy guard. Patton stood alone across from him. No translator at first. Then Weber arrived. Patton spoke calmly. Prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. I have one question. Cat translation. Rail translation. Richter nodded. Patton's eyes locked on his. When you took those tags, a pause, did you ever once think about who those men were? Horror camp, and saw something horror answered immediately. Weber's face darkened. What did he say? Weber hesitated. Then he said, no. Patton stood motionless. Weber swallowed and continued. He says dead men are dead men. Horrifying camp. The silence after that answer felt endless. Then Patton gave a small nod, almost to himself as if some final doubt had vanished. He stepped closer and said, that is why you lost. Horrifying bidding Weber translated. Re-ing translate. Transvoice. Newt Dishak Kafner Kassing collapsed. Translation. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. You lost because men who stopped humanity hunums in a thirds from sacking feather, eventually cesare humanity. In some false transition. Richter said nothing, for Patton turned away. The guards led Richter out, walked through a prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. And no one in that room spoke, because everyone understood the war had not merely been fought over land, or border, or politics. Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so fought over whether civilization itself would survive men like that. And in that moment, the dog tags were no longer just evidence. Walked through a prisoner camp. They were proof of why the war had to be won. Old walked through a prisoner camp. The most dangerous people in history are not always the loudest or the cruelest at first. They are the ones who learn to stop seeing others as human. Prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. The moment a person becomes less than human in someone's mind, almost as any atrocity becomes possible. Weeks passed. Germany surrendered. Church bells rang in liberated towns. Soldiers danced in muddy streets. A prisoner camp, newspapers printed headlines about victory in Europe. Crowds back in America. Flooded avenues with flags and confetti. For millions, the war was ending. Prisoner camp, and saw so horrifying. But inside a quiet administrative building, near Frankfurt, another kind of battle. On a long table sat 50 envelopes, each addressed by hand. Where prisoner camp saw something so horrifying, each containing a letter no Marteau family ever wanted to receive. Lieutenant Harper stood over them in silence. He had survived artillery, ambushes, sleepless nights, and interrogations in duty. But this was harder. Walked through a prisoner camp. And Jaxus, etching is a nar frischers, Marinalbert Newerden clay. Words do not eat the same envil table, carried the same unbearable truth. We found your town, what happened, and he is not coming home. Prisoner camp, and Jenner Sabesham, near the jarring entered Reffinghams, Sunry. He looked at the envelope, then at Harper. How many completed? All 50, sir. Patton walked to the table, picked one up. Walk so horrifying. Read the name, Mrs. Eleanor Merston, Massachusetts. He turned it over in his hands carefully, almost gently. Then said it them today. Yes, sir. Harper hesitated, something so horrifying. Then asked quietly, knowing is better? Sir. Patton looked at him for a long moment, then answered, no. A pause. But truth is still owed. Looked through a prisoner near a camp, saw something so horrifying. That was the burden of war few men spoke about, Tim's themes. Some teams truth deeper than uncertainty ever could. But without truth grief never ends. Saw something so horrifying, frozen in hope. Unfinished, finished, from Singdu. In Lanchix, in homes scattered in America, for prosting. B. Kansas-y, Kansas. Texas-y, Ohio, with door boxes open. Horrify camp, and saw something. Hands trembled, and 50 families learned the war had finally told them what it had done. In Boston. In Boston, Eleanor Mercer sat at her kitchen table with shaking fingers. A prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. Her son had been missing. Met her, no body, no graving. Just a telegram months earlier that read, missing in action. Walked through a prisoner camp at Montsir camp, and saw something every day since then in a prison of uncertainty, still setting up places for some times. Still waking at night, convinced she heard his footsteps. Horrifying. Still refusing to say the word to dead. Then came the letter, and the dog tag enclosed inside. She held the medal in her palm. Read his name, Daniel Mercer, her boy. So horrifying. The kitchen blurred through tears. And, for the first time, she knew. Not hoped. Not feared. A tew. And certainty, painful as it was, finally let grief begin. Olking. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp, and saw something so in texting the Olking, in Texas. Harold Jennings' widow collapsed when the package arrived. Her husband had promised he would be home before their daughter learned to read. Walked through a prisoner camp. Now their daughter stood beside her asking, why is mommy crying? No one ever has a good answer for that question. Order camp, and saw something so horrifying. General Ohio Leonard Brooks, World War, read the letter alone in his garage. He sat in silence for nearly an hour afterward. Order camp, and saw something so horrifying. Then placed the tag beside own military medals and wept where no one could see him. Back in Germany, Patton reviewed copies of several family responses. Many were simple. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Nourishing, thank you for telling us. Thank you for bringing him home. Thank you for not letting him disappear. But some were harder. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something, one mother wrote. The pain of learning how my son died is unbearable. But the pain of never knowing would have been worse. Thank you for treating him as if he mattered. Horrifner camp and saw some so line twice, then folded the letter slowly. Because that, more than medals, more than speeches, more than victory parades, was the true measure of honor, or a prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying, not how a nation celebrates its warriors, but how it remembers them. Harper ran later that evening alone near the perimeter fence. He seemed unusually quiet. Harper approached carefully. Ori something so horrifying. Sir? Patton handed him the letter. Harper read it. That woman will carry that pain the rest of her life. Harper nodded. Yes, sir. Keen so fortificamp. Patton looked out into the dusk, and yet she thanked us. A pause. That's what soldiers forget sometimes. Harper waited. Patton continued. Horrifying. We think war is fought by the men at the front. He shook his head. No. It's fought by another pause. It's fought by mothers, too. Harper said nothing. Patton's voice lowered. Prisoner camp and something so horrifying. By wives, by fathers, by children. He looked at Andrew. We stared seeing every soldier we lude sleetiers through a family, like artillery, through a wall. That, stayed with Harper, walk through a prisoner camp, and does not kill one man. At a time it wounds outward. It wounds generations, into futures that never happen. Orifern, and saw something so horrifying. In the dog tag story spread through the American ranks. Not officially. Soldiers told each other, truck drivers, medics, tank crews, infantrymen, the tale passed camp to camp, walked through a prisoner camp, about the SS officer, who wore 50 American dead around his neck, about Patton ripping justices from his sins, about the general who made sure the fallen were named. And the story changed men, walked through a prisoner camp, and saw something the poachers, for soldiers, exhausted by years of death, it reminded them why disciplines mattered, why honor was not ceremonial, it was practical, necessary. Horrifying camp, because once men's respecting the dead respect, for the living dies soon after. Browman, one afternoon, Harper visited the camp chapel, not for prayer, just for quiet. A prisoner camp, walk something so horrifying. Inside Sachang's stand in process. General Anoon, the German and survived Sergeant Thomas Stone. The witness of the shot from Bastaded, Harper sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. They said that exulting, horrifying, camping. Harper nodded. Rayleigh stared ahead. All of them. A long silence, then. They deserved that. Harper looked at him. Rayleigh's voice dropped. You know what haunted me most? Walked something so horrifying. Harper waited. Not the shooting. Harper waited. He swallowed. Not even the dying. He stared at the chapel floor. It was how fast they stopped being been to him. Sing better. He niffer. The words hit hard, Rayleigh continued. 1 minute, my friends were talking, joking, targets. He paused. That's what evil is, Lieutenant. Orishing were before it ants. And saw something. Harp is evil. Evil is never got always rage. Because not always hatred. Sometimes it is indifference. The ability to look at another human being and feel nothing. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so walked a refined fashion. And personal soldier signed the final drawn transport authorization for Richter's war crimes transfer. He held the paper longer than necessary before signing. Then said quietly, make sure he arrives alive. Harper blinked. Yes, sir. Patton. Patton looked up. He does not get to escape judgment. That was the thing about Patton. For all his fury, he believed justice mattered more than revenge. Walked through a prisoner camp and something so horrifying can kill a hated enemy. It takes restraint to make him stand, to make stand trial. As Richter was loaded into transport under armed guard, several soldiers watched silently. Matching so horrifying muttered, they should just shoot him now. Patton, overheard, turned and said, no. Patton stepped closer. If we kill him in anger. His voice was calm. Walked through a prisoner camp, and he told you believing he was a soldier. Then he dies believing. He was soldier. A pause. But the world will remember him for what he truly was. Through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. The soldier lowered his eyes. Richter's truck drove away that morning, beneath gray skies. Gone to face judgment. Gone to meet the weight of 50 names. Orthing the word winksing. Natural Patton said then zenuancy until the vehicle in Sassy then turn watched until the reward camp. Toward work. Toward war's endless aftermath. Because battles may win peace, only truth and justice can preserve it. Horrifying. And saw something so horrifying. And in homes across America 50 families of Fopties now knew where to place this grief. Where to direct their tears. Where to speak goodbye. Not into uncertainty, but into memory. Walked through a prisoner camp. And some that is the only mercy war leaves behind. Ora King Moon, mean teens the mether, Ikas. Closer Toldager, walks to raise pain. But it gives pain a place to rest. One of the great acts of respect we can show the fallen is to ensure they are remembered not as statistics, but as human beings whose lives mattered deeply to those who loved them. Horror camp and saw something so horrifying. The courtroom was silent to hear paper moves. Nargans. Nuremberg. War had ended in 1946, but its ghosts were still arriving daily. They came in boxes of documents, in photographs of Oharifa camp, and saw something's statements, in mass graves, And on that morning, they came in the form of 50 American dog tags, laid neatly on a table before the tribunal, each one polished. Took a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Each one tagged as evidence, each one waiting to speak for a man who no longer could. Klaus Richter sat at the defense table in pressed prison gray. His posture was straight, Washington prisoner camp, his face unreadable. He looked less like a monster now than he had in the prison camp. That, perhaps, was the most unsettling part. Real evil rarely looks dramatic in court, old and something so horrifying. It looks ordinary, human. Calm. Almost, General Patton was not called to testify. He did not need to be. Prisoner Careman. General Patton of the necklace, his discovery of the necklace had started the case, but the case now belonged to the dead. And the dead had many witnesses. Lieutenant Harper sat in the gallery behind the prosecutors, walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. He had been asked to attend because he had overseen much of the original investigation. He watched as the prosecutor rose and approached the evidence table, then slowly lifted the first dog tag, horrifying, and saw something so Mercer. The room was still. He set it down. The room was still. Staff Sergeant Harold Jennings set it down. Another. Private Leonard Brooks, horrifying, and saw something so horrifying. One by read, so theatrics, no raised voice, just names. By the 20th name, several in the gallery were crying quietly. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw told Pat something so horrifying. By the 40th, even some reporters had stopped writing, because everyone understood what the prosecution was doing. They were refusing to let the victims become statistics. Not 50 dead Americans, Kermit Koshir. Not multiple casualties, not multiple war losses, lives. Men, individuals, lives. The witnesses followed. Sergeant Tom O'Reilly testified first. He described the execution line in Bastogne. The medic shot first. Walk Patton were prisoner so horrifying. The wounded of murdered in snow. The wounded murdered in snow, Richter's laughter. Then came the field hospital witnesses. And captured had entered a temporary aid station and ordered all wounded Americans shot because evacuation would slow retreat. Irian forfeiture, them sager. All something a civilian nurse tesses from corpses personally. Then the prosecutions introduced battlefield records society, missing prisoner logs, unit records, medical records, full prisoner camp, and saw something narrowing the truth gow. Each truth tighter around Richter's throat. When the defendants finally stood, fog argument, battle confusion, unreliable memory, soldier following orders, round sermon so horrifying, the same excuses history always hears from who mistake obedience hears from men, who mistake obedience for morality. Then Rick spoke in measured German, no remorse, grief, no apology, ording so prisoner same. Justification. Only just again as translate. Webb rendered the words into English. I did my duty. Silence. These men were enemies. Silence. War is not murder. Still silence. Horrifying. Then the prosecutor stepped forward. Held up one dog tag. One tag. Daniel Mercer's. And this wounded medic in Richter. Was he your enemy when he was unarmed? Holding and no answer. And set. The prosecutor lifted another. Drunschenber. Metter. This treasure after surrender, nothing, another. And this man in a field hospital, unable to walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Richter finally answered. Weber translated. They wore enemy uniforms. Richter, a murmur rippled through the courtroom, because that one sentence revealed everything. To Richter, humanity ended where uniform began. To prisoner camp and saw something them, so several seconds. The prosecutor stared him for final question. Do you regret any of it? The entire courtroom held its breath. Richter answered immediately, walked through a prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. Weber's sounded colder were than gentle word when he translated, taking more completely than any evidence had. Because guilt can be argued, intent can be debated, horrific camp, and saw something so horrifying. Memory can be challenged, but fine reparent evil. The tribunal deliberated for less than one. They returned, the courtroom stood. The presiding judge read the verdict slowly, walked through a prisoner camp, and saw 18 horrifyings. On the charge of unlawful execution of surrenders this gestured prisoners guilty. The charge of murder of wounded prisoners of war guilty. Again, horrifying, again, count after count, guilty, 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 guilt, total convictions, again word to deck. The defendant is sentenced to death by hanging. No reaction from Richter. Ording no tears, no collapse. He simply sat, cold, prisoner weather. Harper, Shasif hearing, not triumph, not satisfaction. Only wait, because justice is not joy. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Not when 50 men of the execution. The execution was carried out in early 1947. Official witnesses later reported Richter's final statement. I served apology. No apology. No remorse. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. No regret. He Sergeant seen no regret meaning. He died believing. Duty excused cruelty, and that, perhaps, was the final tragedy him. They destroy others so completely that they also destroy the part of themselves capable of understanding what they became. A prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Weeks after the execution, Harper's traveled home. The war was over, his service complete. But before leaving Europe, he visited General Patton one last time. Patton was reviewing reports when Harper entered. Horrifying. At ease stepped forward. Saw Harper. Sir, I just want to step goodbye. Patton nodded, then noticed something in Harper. Patton nodded. A single dog's hand. Daniel Mercer's. Family returned it, according so horrifying. Harper nodded. His mother sent me a letter. Sup, Brad? His mother sent me to keep it. She be a letter. Patton looked surprised. She wrote, You helped bring my son home. Her horrifying. I want someone who remembers him to carry his name forward. Patton silently for a moment. Then stood, walked around the desk, looked at the tag, then at Harper, horrifying, and saw Snutha's armies wear names. Names around their necks, Lieutenant. Harper for identification, sir. Patton gave a faint smile. That's what regulations say. He pointed to the tag, at Horrify Camp, and saw something so horrifying. But Ellie, a pause. It's because every soldier fears the same thing. Hack. Harper waited. Not death? Patton's voice softened. Silence filled the room. Patton looked toward the window. Packing within Europe, and saw things so horrifying. Toward a Europe's, rebuilding from fire. Still of memory, he said the purpose of Fuikali is to deny evil its final harp. I forgot those words. Orking the cap and so. Horrifying. Years later, long after Patton was gone, long after the war had become instead of memory, Harper would tell the story to historians. Not of the trial, not of the execution. Walked through something so horrifying that near the morning of Fanacking wine, at the processing camp, 50 tags falling into dirt north, of soldiers kneeling to pick them up, of Patton saying, These are not evidence. These are remains. Eris camp, and saw something so horrifying, and the story the same way he would hold it would always, and Daniel Mercer's tag, now worn smooth with time, and say, the lesson was never about one SS officer. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying, Cass. He would pause. It was about what happens when people stop seeing other human beings. Another pause. Sislak. Because every atrocity in history begins there. Or a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Then he would look at his audience, young soldier, students, historians, ordinary people or hot at him. Civilization is not measured by how fiercely men fight. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. The lines they refused to cross while fighting. The dog tags were never trophies. They were never evidence alone. They were never just metal. Cracking line. Walked so horrifying. They were proof that even in humanity's darkest hour, some men chose to remember what honor meant, and some men chose not to. History remembered both. One, as a killer who collected the dead, walked through a prisoner, Pampsy so horrifying, as the general who made sure the dead were counted, named Avel, returned honored Wavel, because in the end, the final duty of the living is simple, to remember the fallen as human beings, walk through our Riksnuffer, and to make certain, Vern, the world never forgets what happens when people are treated as anything less. Thurking, and saw something stark in Eckager. So horrifying. Every great atrocity in history begins with the belief that some people matter less than others. The moment we allow human dignity to become conditional, we open the door to horrors beyond imagination. A prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Honor is not proven by how we treat those we love. It is proven by how we treat even the powerless, the defeated, and the dead.